Howdy folks, today we're looking at the original Ghost Rider Rides Again #1 from 1991 in Marvel Comics. Back in the early 90s, the Ghost Rider was, if you'll pardon the pun, hot. The new Ghost Rider launched in spring of 1990, written by Howard Mackie, with the superstar team of Javier Saltares and Mark Texeira on art, had been an unexpected hit. Ghost Rider had never been a bestseller in his Bronze Age prime, and the company was from all reports surprised when the revamped character started selling. It really wasn't that much of a surprise, however, and this is speaking as someone who remembers buying the first issue of that volume of Ghost Rider at the supermarket. The 90s Ghost Rider was cool, about as cool as the character had ever been. A demon biker swinging a chain and riding a futuristic motorcycle dedicated to wreaking vengeance. From there, the company lost no time in exploiting the character. Ghost Rider was suddenly an in-demand guest star, appearing across the line, rubbing shoulders with the Punisher, Spider-Man, and even the X-Men in their own book, no less. Spin-offs also appeared, a whole line of books premiering 2 years later with the Rise of the Midnight Suns event. But that wasn't all. The year after the new Ghost Rider hit stands, Marvel put out a reprint book, a double-sized series presenting the last year or so of the original run in 7 thick volumes. The original Ghost Rider Rides Again. Now, the funny thing about the first volume of Ghost Rider is that by far the best stretch of the book's history was the last year or so. After many solid, sleepy years as a C-lister, trending slowly downwards on the way to an inevitable cancellation, suddenly the character came alive in the home stretch, and that resurrection is ultimately down to one man, Bob Budiansky. He's better known today both as an editor and as a writer. He wrote the lion's share of Marvel's earliest Transformers comics and contributed a great deal to the formative years of that franchise. But he started as a penciler, and this series reprints in entirety his run on the character, who I'd argue has never looked quite so good before or after. Budiansky's skill as an artist stands out in light of the fact that he walked away from the drawing board almost entirely after this book. There's a Submariner Limited series afterwards, and with a few small exceptions, that's pretty much it. He drew one issue of his run on Transformers, issue 55, literally the last issue of his run as writer, seemingly just so he could say he'd done it. So, just what was it that worked so well about this run of Ghost Rider, besides the art? Well, the premise here is significantly different than any later iteration of the character. There's a friction at the character's core here, stemming from the fact that the original Ghost Rider was actually kind of evil. He wasn't a misunderstood alter ego for Johnny Blaze. He wasn't even a spirit of vengeance obsessed with delivering justice. No, the original Ghost Rider was a mean mother, a demon from hell itself bonded to the soul of a good man with bad judgment. The dynamic was closer to the Hulk, with a bit of Jack Kirby's demon as well. The main conflict in the book was between Johnny and the Ghost Rider. The Rider wanted to be free because it wanted to hurt people in no uncertain terms. And the longer the book continued, the harder Johnny had to fight to keep his demon from hurting the people he loved. The story told across the last year of the book is the final battle of that long war. Howdy folks, today we're looking at the original Ghost Rider Rides Again #2 from 1991 in Marvel Comics. The reprint of the last leg of the first run of the Ghost Rider solo book continues, with a pair of issues that reveal significant shortcomings in the company's approach to the character at the time. To put it bluntly, Ghost Rider wasn't on anyone's radar in 1982. The present comic book reprints issues 70 and 71 of the run and features 2 completely different creative teams. The first issue is written by the ever-reliable Roger Stern for Bob Budiansky and Dave Simons, with the second written by James DeMatteis for Don Perlin and Danny Bulanati. Despite being from completely different people, both issues read very similar. Ghost Rider's status quo at the time featured Johnny Blaze as a stunt rider in a traveling carnival, a position that meant in practical terms the series could feature both frequent travel as well as a stable supporting cast. In practice, the results are what we might now uncharitably call a Monster of the Week format. Every issue we meet a different menace for the Ghost Rider to thrash, but nothing sticks for longer than it takes for the circus to pull up stakes and load out. Budiansky's clearly excellent art needs better stories. The first half of the book, featuring issue 70 of the original run, focuses on a hypertrophied member of the Quentin Carnival family who dresses like a caveman to scare patrons. Jeremy is drafted by a rich man's private freak show that accidentally catches the Ghost Rider in its dragnet. It's not a very satisfying story, inasmuch as the very idea of freak shows was already fading into history by the early 80s and seems now positively medieval. Clearly, Todd Browning's 1932 horror drama Freaks is intended is the influence here, but the comic doesn't have a lot to say on the matter other than it sure is weird that a rich guy on an island somewhere is putting together his own private freak show to use for crime. The second issue here, originally number 71 in the lineup, shows a bit more life, despite it being by a different artist. Don Perlin drew the lion's share of the original Ghost Rider series, so he certainly understood the character and worked with DeMatteis for a significant run on the Defenders, but frankly has always struck me as an odd fit for stories about magic and the macabre. This issue picks up on a menace from a recent issue of their run of Defenders, Null the Living Darkness, a very DeMatteis threat, an amorphous ball of evil vibes determined to kill as many people as possible. He actually manages to hurt the Ghost Rider, which, as you can imagine, really just inspires our man to new heights of frenzy. What I appreciate most about the original Ghost Rider is the degree to which, even a relatively subdued outing like this, can't get around the fact that the main character is an evil demon whose solution to every problem is simply murderous rage. I can respect that, even if it can occasionally lead to formulaic results. Of course, the series would shape up considerably from here on out, while Stern still had a couple issues left to write. When DeMatteis and Budiansky meet in the final stretch, that's when the character really begins to take off. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at the original Ghost Rider Rides Again number 3 from 1991 in Marvel Comics. If the first two issues of this reprint series have shown a series struggling to find its footing despite clear strengths, the third installment finally puts the hammer down, so to speak. All this despite being a spotlight for the Circus of Crime, a vintage group of Marvel villains certainly dating all the way back to 1962's Incredible Hulk number 3, and even further than that, with an early version of the group appearing in issue 5 of the original run of Captain America comics from 1941. The idea of a criminal circus is an old one at Marvel, even as it doesn't have a lot of currency anymore. There just aren't very many traveling circuses in the 21st century, and they were already thin on the ground by the early 80s when this comic was originally published. But this is comics. The Circus of Crime happens on the scene because that outfit's clown just happens to be the son of the clown for the Quentin Carnival, Johnny Blaze's home and family. The clown, fresh out of jail, arrives to visit his dad, but old associates are hot on his heels. The Circus of Crime was rudderless at the moment, having left their old leader, the ringmaster, in prison and seeking out the clown to return to the fold as their new leader. He doesn't want that, so the circus set about reminding him of his old associations the best way they know, acts of industrial espionage. The circus provides the backdrop for the book's real conflict, however, that between Johnny Blaze and his demonic alter ego. This iteration of the Ghost Rider just isn't a nice guy. It's not his job to hurt innocents, but he also doesn't really care all that much about collateral damage. It's his job to punish the guilty, and he's really good at his job. It's not hard, given this, to understand the degree to which Johnny comes to fear and resent his curse. The Ghost Rider here is only nominally a force for good. He wants to hurt people because he wants to hurt people, and for the most part he wants to wreak vengeance on the guilty because those are the people he's allowed to hurt. We see this in the first half of the two-parter when, after weeks of suppression, Johnny lets the Ghost Rider loose to save the elder clown from a fire set by the circus. Ghost Rider really could not care less about actually helping people, and it's sheer luck he doesn't break the guy's neck at throwing him free of the fire. Next issue features an all-out brawl between the Circus of Crime and the staff of the Quentin Carnival, with the younger clown betraying his former mates in order to stand up for his dad. The Ghost Rider is actually incidental to this conflict, overcoming Johnny's reticence in time to arrive only after the carnage is almost done. From there he finds the younger clown and gives him a dose of his soul-shattering hellfire, similar in function to the later writer's vaunted penance stare, only to be told after the fact that the clown was actually fighting on the side of the angels, and the Ghost Rider just meted out infernal torment to someone who was trying to do the right thing. The Ghost Rider we see under Bob Budiansky's pencil is a mean piece of work, an angry sadist willing to destroy Johnny Blaze to get what he wants, that is, freedom from Johnny's mind, which he considers his prison. This was years before the Hulk began to utilize a similar dynamic, with the Hulk and Bruce Banner taking turns screaming at each other in their respective heads. The difference here, of course, is that no version of the Hulk is truly evil, save perhaps for the Maestro, whereas the Ghost Rider, for all his talk about punishing the guilty, is simply a monster. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at the original Ghost Rider Rides Again number 4 from 1991 in Marvel Comics. And with this issue, the creative team for the last stretch finally comes together as penciler Bob Budiansky is joined by writer DeMatteis, coming aboard as scripter and co-plotter alongside Budiansky. The first story here, originally presented as issue number 74 in 1982, is the strongest of the run yet, with Johnny out on the road after the carnage of the previous issue. The Ghost Rider is becoming more violent and less tractable, more willing to hurt people who don't deserve it, seemingly without even paying lip service to notions of justice. So distracted is Johnny that the first page sees him crashing his bike and barely surviving a fall into a ravine. He's saved by a kindly old man named Adam, himself on the run from parts unknown. It doesn't take long, however, for Adam's dark master to find him and drag him back to his crumbling mansion deep in the swamp. And it's here we first meet Saltares, an immortal ghoul surrounded by decaying remnants of antebellum splendor, attended by the living dead whose souls he has stolen. The haunting Southern Gothic comes to life under Budiansky's pencil, ably assisted by inker Dave Simons, and into this horror milieu stumbles the Ghost Rider, a rampaging bull in the china shop of Saltares' ghastly mausoleum. This wouldn't be the last we'd see of Saltares, but the next issue features a showdown with another new foe, the deadly Steel Wind. For all that this incarnation of the Ghost Rider doesn't have the reputation for having the best rogues gallery, I'm looking at you, Orb. Steel Wind is a great character with only a handful of appearances in subsequent decades. A cyborg stunt rider with a high-tech bike built to go toe-to-toe with the Ghost Rider, a femme fatale with a tragic backstory, rebuilt by a mysterious benefactor to be his enforcer, and a long-term plan to destroy a string of traveling carnivals. Now, admittedly, this is the part of the story that might require a bit more in the way of suspension of disbelief from a contemporary perspective. The same guy who we saw obsessed with building an army of carnival freaks in the second issue is apparently also really concerned with putting a string of traveling shows out of business, as we see when an investigative reporter digs out the connections between this series of ruined carnivals and the mysterious Steel Wind. Frankly, I don't remember how this plot plays out, but just rereading these issues week to week, it sticks out that anyone that intent on putting traveling circuses out of business could have spent the next few years at home watching Dallas with much the same results. Still, even given that, Steel Wind is an excellent villain, a deadly sexy cyborg years before deadly sexy cyborgs hit the zeitgeist. As the series heads into the home stretch, there's the slightly frustrating sensation of seeing the book finally find its feet under it, with compelling art, a stable supporting cast, and a consistent tone. Still, it would be difficult to argue this kind of high Bronze Age action horror, even superbly done, wasn't already a bit of an anachronism, hitting shelves as it did alongside the same run of Swamp Thing that immediately preceded Alan Moore's revolutionary work on that title. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at the original Ghost Rider Rides Again number 5 from 1991 in Marvel Comics. As strange as it may seem in hindsight, it wasn't until the issues before us, originally issues 76 and 77 of the Ghost Rider's first run, that the demon who shared a body with Johnny Blaze was actually given a name and origin. Here, for the first time, we meet Zarathos, a demon from man's prehistory who fell afoul of none other than Mephisto himself, Marvel's premier lord of the underworld. The first issue here gives us the spectacle of Johnny and his demon actually finally separated, albeit not under circumstances to either of their liking. They've been called back to hell by Mephisto to run a race for the amusement of Mephisto and Asmodeus, a minor demon who dares to instigate a wager with the Dread Lord himself. To heighten the stakes, however, the race is not one against the other. Blaze and Zarathos are given the opportunity to be separated, but only if they cooperate and reach the finish line together. Overland in hell, they must battle demons and legions of the damned, assembled by Asmodeus to ensure he wins his infernal bargain. Of course, as you could probably guess, Mephisto's dealing from a crooked deck, and everyone involved finds themselves worse for wear from the exercise. This leads into the next issue, where a frustrated Zarathos, incensed anew at his captivity inside Blaze's soul, finds himself pulled into the machinations of another demon lord, the fiendish Nightmare, who reveals the origin of Zarathos, a petty demon lord who grew powerful on Earth as the patron of a tribe of pre-Columbian natives before his burgeoning empire of souls comes to the attention of Mephisto, who defeats the demon and binds him to eternal amnesiac servitude, a position he maintained until this very issue. Of course, that comes as very bad timing for Johnny, pulled back into the machinations of the sinister Ronaldo and his gang of sinister circus freaks. Admittedly, it again must be said that the persistent use of the circus freaks as evil henchmen just has not aged well at all, although Ronaldo's fiendish plan to transform Blaze into a half-human, half-motorcycle hybrid monster does carry the unmistakable air of Cronenberg body horror, not to be dismissed. In any event, Nightmare's honeyed words convince Zarathos not to come to Johnny's aid, leaving him to be set upon, drugged, and strapped to a gurney in anticipation of the diabolical transformation. The series enters its endgame. The partnership between Johnny and his inner demon has advanced beyond the point of no return, with the relationship devolving devolving into open hatred and sabotage. Now, worth pointing out, the cover to this issue, reprinted from issue 76, is one of my favorite covers ever, showcasing Bob Budiansky's masterful, Mike Plug-influenced art, detailed and moody while at the same time never sacrificing dynamism. That issue is actually drawn by the returning Don Perlin, who rises to the occasion for an issue set mostly within the dark netherworld of Mephisto's realm. But here we see the strengths of the series scripter James DeMatteis, co-plotting alongside his artistic collaborators. Ghost Rider's a horror book, and that means it needs effectively macabre narration, just slightly purple prose to amplify the melodramatic stakes of a man fighting the most literal expression of his inner demons. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at the original Ghost Rider Rides Again number 6 from 1991 in Marvel Comics. The endgame continues as we finally meet the dread Freakmaster himself, behind-the-scenes manipulator for almost a year during the book's final run. And folks, I wish I could tell you the Freakmaster wasn't actually such a big part of the story. His machinations to control the Quentin Carnival finally come to a head here, and my goodness, but does it seem in hindsight like a tempest in a teapot. The story takes as granted that Carnival freak shows are a massive cultural institution, when, point of fact, you'd have been hard-pressed to find one in 1983 when the story was published, and they were long gone certainly by the time this book was reprinted 8 years later. Johnny Blaze's occupation as a stunt rider actually remains fairly solid, all things considered. There are still people who ride motorcycles for a living, just not really existing in the long-gone milieu of a traveling show. It's a mark against an otherwise very diverting run of comics. We finally meet the villainous Freakmaster, whose ambition in taking over all these traveling carnivals is apparently making a franchise of such freak shows, based around supporting what we are told is a tropical island paradise reserved solely for the carnival freaks. His supposedly benevolent motivations, however, are paid by his plans to forcibly surgically transform the performers of the Quentin Carnival into freaks themselves, after having been sold out by the carnival's increasingly desperate owner. Just how much money does the Freakmaster have devoted to this whole suboptimal Anton-Arcane vibe in the first place? The Freakmaster has a whole traveling surgical staff devoted solely to turning normal human beings into self-styled freaks for his amusement. Thankfully, this guy hasn't appeared since 1983, and if I had to wager money on the question, I'd be willing to bet he never appears again. If ever there was a comic book scheme absolutely certain to lose the villain a great deal of money, it was this. Thank heavens for the Ghost Rider. The main conflict in these issues is between Johnny Blaze and himself. Strapped to the operating table by the Freakmaster surgeons, Blaze is tormented by Nightmare, who forces Blaze to confront a lifetime full of disappointment and recriminations, beginning with his absent, long-departed parents, through to his adopted parents, and to the women in his life who made the mistake of falling for a man congenitally unable to outrace his own demons, both figurative and literal. It's here we see the mark of a young James DeMatteis, only a handful of years into his writing career at this point, and yet already a very distinctive presence. DeMatteis at his best trains a laser focus on the inner conflicts of his heroes. Certainly his work on Spider-Man is distinguished by taking Peter Parker as far as he can go into his own fears and insecurities, and likewise with characters as diverse as Captain America, Dr. Fate, and even the Phantom Stranger. Here we see his approach at its most elemental. Johnny Blaze is a man trying desperately to outrace his own mistakes, unable to forgive himself and yet constantly forced against the limitations of his own willpower. The appeal of the original version of the character, as I've said, is precisely that of the Hulk, if the Hulk were genuinely evil. Resisting the temptation to let the writer free even when confronted with the genuine need is a constant test of Johnny's resolve, one which he often loses, but never without a struggle. As a metaphor for inner demons, the Ghost Rider is the most literal manifestation of self-control possible. If you suffer from bouts of self-destructive anger, Johnny Blaze is, now, and forever will be, your guy. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at the original Ghost Rider Rides Again number 7 from 1990 in Marvel Comics. And so we reach the end of the road with Johnny Blaze and his constant companion, Marvel's first and finest demon biker. The issues were printed here, number 80 and 81 of the original run of the book, were the final issues of this series and could very well have stood as the final Ghost Rider stories ever told. When the character was resurrected 7 years later, Johnny Blaze and Zarathos were nowhere to be seen, at least initially. Although, as the revived book exploded in popularity, the series cast was in short order shuffled back into the fray. But the creators here had no way of knowing any of that, and so gave the saga of the Ghost Rider what can only be described as a happy ending, or at least Johnny Blaze received a happy ending, riding off into the sunset reunited with his one true love, Roxanne Simpson. As for the Ghost Rider himself, Zarathos, maybe not quite such a happy ending. After the near destruction of the Quentin Carnival last issue, Blaze hops on a bike with Roxanne, the woman who saved his soul all the way back in the character's origin. She needs Johnny's help back in her hometown of Holly, which has been been ravaged by the predations of a charismatic preacher going by the name of Sin Eater, no relation to the Spider-Man villain of the same name. Turns out that this Sin Eater is in league with another of the Ghost Rider's enemies, Centurious, the man without a soul, as seen a few issues back. Now that we've had Ghost Rider's origin, it can be revealed that Centurious's enmity for the Ghost Rider goes back millennia, to the very origin of Zarathos' captivity by Mephisto. There's a lot on the plate here, even at the end of the series. In the first place, it should be noted that James DeMatteis is taking aim squarely at the new breed of popular preachers who'd crept into the public spotlight by the early 80s, turning a lust for fire and brimstone into a mass media phenomenon that has never really abated. The Sin Eater, for his part, actually regrets his part in Centurious' cynical schemes, and his sincere repentance becomes the means by which the Ghost Rider is finally separated from Blaze. The final battle between Zarathos and Centurious is the undercard for the final battle between Zarathos and Blaze. After Centurious steals Blaze's soul, Zarathos must come to terms with the fact that he's stuck, tethered to Blaze's soul for so long as he walks the earth. That admission is abject defeat for the monster. The essential conflict between Johnny Blaze and his indefatigable demon was resolved the best way possible. Ultimately, Zarathos' inherent pettiness, his dogged determination to revenge himself on his enemies, allows Roxanne to trick him into separating from Johnny full-time. As strange as it may seem in hindsight, the Ghost Rider didn't really take off as a character until the hot breath of cancellation was on the book's neck. And even if the ending here is relatively open-ended, at least as far as comic book finales are concerned, no one saw fit to disturb Johnny's ride into the sunset, not until a decade had passed and another character had assumed the mantle. Ghost Rider was an early highlight for DeMatteis, as well as a standout run from artist Bob Budiansky, who after this never really had another chance at the spotlight. If these videos accomplish anything, I hope they've inspired you to take another look at the work of this underrated maverick, a great artist who, sadly from our perspective, chose instead a fulfilling career as a writer and an editor. But as far as I'm concerned, Budiansky remains one of the unsung greats of his generation. He could have been a contender, but we must content ourselves with what he gave us. Howdy folks, today we're looking at Ghost Rider number 1 from 1990 in Marvel Comics. Following the original Ghost Rider's cancellation in 1983, it would be another 7 years before the character was seen again, only not quite. This is where I joined the story. I bought this comic at the supermarket in the winter of 1990. It cost a whole $1 extra, but in fairness it was twice as big and printed on slightly nicer paper. The story has it that Marvel in 1990 was taken aback by just how well the new Ghost Rider reboot performed. But in hindsight, it shouldn't have been any kind of surprise. This is a phenomenal first issue, and a great introduction for the character to a new generation of readers. Now, it must be repeated, there's no connection here to the character whose final adventures we spent the last 7 weeks following. Johnny Blaze and Zarathos are nowhere to be seen, and in their place we're given a new protagonist, young Danny Ketch, and a new spirit of vengeance altogether. Of course, that's undoubtedly one of the reasons why the book was such a hit out of the gate. This is at least ostensibly a clean slate, with no stopping along the way to fill in the blanks with references to decades-old comics. The new Ghost Rider is a figure of mystery, and the book made it clear that the resolution to the mystery of the new Ghost Rider was never going to be just Zarathos in a different set of leathers. Now, we couldn't have known in 1990, but that same sense of open-ended mystery would eventually be the character's downfall. The question of the Ghost Rider's unknown origins would linger until the book was veritably drowning in red herrings and conspiracies, with writer Howard Mackie having learned all the wrong lessons from the success of Chris Claremont's long-running mutant soap opera. Johnny Blaze was soon enough folded back into the book, and eventually connections with the original character were established. But the hook of the original iteration of the character was gone and would never return. In hindsight, what James DeMatteis and Bob Budiansky gave us in the last year of that book was something very close to a stem-to-stern reboot, in the same vein as Swamp Thing's famous anatomy lesson, recontextualizing the character by giving us new information about his origin in such a way as to change the essential conflicts at the strip's heart. All that was forgotten for the new iteration. Danny Ketch's relationship with the Ghost Rider is certainly fraught, but not in the same way. The new Ghost Rider was never evil, simply violent and uncontrollable. Gone, too, was the dated traveling carnival milieu. In its place, we see the Ghost Rider in New York, fighting organized crime and ninjas, not very far from the gritty urban setting of the Punisher's titles. But ultimately, I think the success of the reboot was down as much to the art as anything else. The team supreme of Javier Saltares and Mark Texeira delivered one of the best-looking books on the stands. Moody, dark, violent, and dynamic in a way that influenced even the likes of Todd McFarlane. No one in comics was messing around with chains until Ghost Rider here started throwing his around like a magic whip. And the rest, as they say, was history.